hear us? Can you hear us in the netherworlds? Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Well, my name is Isak. I'm the assistant dean here at the Hamilton Lugar School. We thank all of you, so many of you, for showing up. Those of you who are in person, just a reminder that there is food there. So either if you want to get it after the event or during, please feel free to do that. We're really excited to kick off this series, which is year 3 now of our Beyond the Web Salon series, where we've really designed the event to just be a place where we can sort of have like a speaker's corner, if you will, on hot topics. And so for the last couple of years, we've been talking about what the internet might look like going back to first principles. And this year, we're sort of focusing on artificial intelligence, but specifically coming at it from multidisciplinary perspectives. We're so grateful that all of you are here. I'll have an announcement at the end just to remind you as well of next month's event. We're hoping to hold at least one of these a month, and I hope that you will be as excited about them as we all are. But with that, just giving you thanks on behalf of the Hamilton Lugar School and the Ostrom Workshop for attending this event. All of you online will have plenty of opportunities here to ask questions. Just a reminder that we'll be monitoring the chat, so if you have any specific thoughts that are coming up, let the chat box be very active. We have speakers here, microphones here, so Doc will be monitoring it and asking the questions to our speaker. But I will let Doc Searles, who is our fellow at the Ostrom Workshop, he and Joyce Searles have been convening together with me and Angie Raymond this event for the last 3 years. And so I will let Doc take it away from here. Once again, thank you.
Thanks, Isak. This is I know there are a number of people here from the media school. There would be no media schools without Marshall McLuhan. Marshall McLuhan invented media studies. And we not only have a media scholar here with Andrew, we have an actual McLuhan. He's the grandson of Marshall, runs the McLuhan Institute. And I don't want to delay any further because I'm very interested in what he has to say. We have a lot of people on here ready to talk as well. This is a salon, not just a lecture. So take it away.
Okay. Thank you, Doc. That really doesn't tell you very much about me, except that Marshall McLuhan was my grandfather.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Probably the less you know, the better, really. Thank you so much, Isak, for inviting me here and the Hamilton Lugar School Workshop. I think this is the first in-person thing I've done in a long time, which is very exciting, but it's also really weird because as the people started coming up on Zoom, I noticed people that I know, including people back home. So that's a kind of weird thing. So I'm not sure what's happening right now, but I'm pleased to be here. Isak made a joke about AI and artificial insemination. So I missed the boat on doing that. But usually how I do speeches the way my father and grandfather did, which was make a bunch of notes and then kind of speak from the notes, because then I can look at all of you instead of the people in front of me. If I just wrote a paper, you could just read that online. But I wrote a paper for a particular purpose, and hopefully you'll forgive me for doing that. Can we survive AI? In considering this question, I first answered yes and no. Yes, we can. Ours is a history of developing technologies which revolutionize all our ways, changing who we are and what it means to be human. And that just might be the definition of what it means to be human. And no, we can't survive AI. AI is poised to revolutionize the way we do many things, which will existentially change who we are and what it means to be human. Louder, Joyce. Louder, Joyce.
Yes. Yes.
I will get closer to the microphone.
There we go.
I'm learning how to do this again. This is fun. The bad news first, we can't survive AI. But the bad news isn't as bad as it might sound. We tend to get alarmed about things which aren't all that alarming and tend to ignore many things which should alarm us. And this seems to be a very human trait. What shouldn't alarm us is that AI is going to change many things about who we are at fundamental levels as individuals and as groups. This shouldn't alarm us because this is not really anything new. What should alarm us is that AI is going to change many things about who we are at fundamental and existential levels as individuals and as groups, because it's going to do it in different and drastic ways, and we have few, if any, safeguards in place to protect us from the changes we don't really want and to protect the parts of us in our cultures we want to preserve. This should alarm us because we're completely unprepared to do very much except react. We find ourselves waking up in the middle of a forest fire with no idea what might be on hand to battle it or how to escape intact. Humans and/versus AI is a really great encapsulation of our relationship with technology, with ourselves. On the one hand, these things are extensions of various parts of ourselves, as Ralph Waldo Emerson, Marshall McLuhan, and others have pointed out. It's also never been an uneasy relationship, has it? Adversarial, whether necessarily or not, I'm not sure. Maybe the first thing I'll do is give you, the audience, an assignment. While I'm reading this paper, consider whether any or all of it was developed using AI. Maybe that question already owns some real estate in your head. As a teacher, you're looking at student work in a new light. As a consumer, wondering how much of what you see and hear in the world might be certified 100% human. Interesting to follow how attitudes develop, who cares about the questions and answers, and where and when they do or do not care. I could say a lot of spicy, provocative things here, just for the sake of provocation, getting a rise, getting attention. But though I might say some spicy, provocative things, it won't be for anything but an attempt to attract attention not to myself, but to some unsettling questions that deserve not just attention, but action. I'm pretty sure, even if you've been living under a rock, you've heard of AI at this point. You've probably heard some very alarming things and are wondering what this means for you, your family, your community, and our world. It seems to be a big deal. All kinds of people are ringing alarm bells. You may have seen a news report like this. Quote, Tesla CEO Elon Musk and Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak were signatories on an open letter signed by more than 2,600 tech industry leaders and researchers. The open letter called for a temporary halt on any further artificial AI intelligence development. The petition shared concerns that AI with human competitive intelligence can pose serious hazards to society and mankind. It urged all AI firms to, quote, immediately cease developing AI systems that are more potent than generative pre-trained Transformer 4, GPT-4, for at least 6 months. GPT-4 is a multimodal large language model created by OpenAI, the fourth in its GPT series. While that might not make a lot of sense to you, you can't help wondering, can we survive AI? On the yes side, we've survived this long, and though this will likely be an order of magnitude greater in speed and scale, we will survive this. And on the no side, we will not remain the same unless we take drastic measures, such as sealing ourselves off as a religious sect might. And even then, on the yes, we will survive side, it needs to be pointed out that this is not humanity's first technological rodeo. In more recent history, some of you may remember a time in a world before we carried powerful miniature computers around with us wherever we went. We had to find a phone booth to make a phone call. Texting was not a thing. We may have carried a small digital camera or held tenaciously to a film camera. We had a wallet in our pocket or purse with money and photos and ID and bank cards in it. It was expected that we might be out of touch for short or long periods of time during the day, and that was okay. And if we went away, you wouldn't expect to hear from me until I got back. We buried ourselves in books or newspapers or Walkmans. our faces not lit up by the gentle glows of our screens. We did not twitch at imaginary notifications. I don't know if life was simpler, but it was different, and we were different. A little further back, some of you may remember a time in a world before the internet so connected it divided us. In that distance, time and place, we looked up numbers and services in the phone book, let our fingers do the walking. A newspaper carried news. We shared our hot takes with anyone who would listen, but that number was greatly, drastically reduced, not potentially thousands or millions. Going viral hit different. Computers generally stayed in one place, and what we know as websites now were CD-ROMs. Again, I don't know if life was simpler, but it was different as we were. Further back still, so far back it's lost in the misty depths. There was a time we didn't have words or spoken language. It's very difficult to imagine life for humans at that time. Very difficult to relate to today. Almost nothing we do today bears any resemblance except the most basic human functions, and even those are very, very different. Generation gaps are now technological, and they're quickly shrinking. But to put things in perspective, it helps to put things into perspective. I'm actually quite taken with the simple act of human speech, something we take utterly for granted, yet something so complex and beautiful, almost miraculous. Imagine, I can have this thought in my head, something to express. I can put it into words, and I can use my mouth and lungs to put it into sound waves carried on my breath to your ear, where it's decoded again back into words, which are in turn decoded into ideas in your head. And we can do this as if it's nothing at all. It's possible that I'm easily amazed, but what a remarkable thing. It never gets old for me. Think about that person before words and speech. Think about what their existence was like. Think about what mattered to them, what matters to us today, which wouldn't mean a thing to them. Fast forward some to ourselves before the internet, or more recently before smartphone. We spent a lot of our day today doing things we didn't do 20 or 30 years ago. Things which were you to tell 30 years younger you about, you would not believe. Aside from the obvious aging, etc., in very many ways, you do not resemble that person in their life. As our technologies change, we change. Everything about us changes personally and socially. Marshall McLuhan, to his delight, became acquainted with a book called And There Was Light by a man named Jacques Lussiran, who was a prominent figure in the French resistance during World War II. As it happens, Jacques Lussiran was born in Paris 99 years ago today. Coincidence, but cool. In this remarkable book, Lussiran recounts in detail how, as a young child of 7, he suffered a playground accident that almost completely robbed him of sight. But rather than this being a story of trauma and loss, he describes how, though he lost his visual faculty, he gained great increases in other faculties. His sense of hearing, of touch, became brighter. Instead of shrinking his world, it opened it up, and there was light. Marshall McLuhan loved this account because it demonstrated vividly what he'd been saying for well over a decade, that the human senses exist in a delicate balance, and the human sensorium is a complex and dynamic thing. To affect one sense is to affect all the senses, and when you juggle the senses, you juggle humanity. The case of the non-sighted versus sighted person is useful in its stark contrast, is perhaps especially vivid in today's world for today's human. Think about the daily life of a blind person, their living situation, performing tasks, getting information by feel, by sound. Sound and tactility have special meaning for them that they don't for us. The visual is obviously of little importance to them except in relation to non-blind people. The The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention say that US children between the ages of 8 and 11 spend an average of 7.5 hours a day in front of a screen for entertainment. They continue. Over a year, that adds up to 114 full days watching a screen for fun. That's just the time they spend in front of a screen for entertainment. It doesn't include the time spent on the computer at school for educational purposes or at home for homework. I wonder if you went back 30 years to 1993 and read that statistic to people, what their reaction would be. The point is that the history of humanity is the history of great innovation and change. The people and societies before and after major and even minor technological leaps don't very much resemble each other. But through it all, we're still human. We're new humans, but we're humans. We bypassed the long, slow but sure evolutionary method for the swift and drastic and uncertain technological one. I don't think we have a Latin classification, but we probably should because we're a far cry from Homo sapiens, or wise man. Speaking man, writing man, printed man, telegraph man, radio man, television man, satellite man, internet man, smartphone man, AI man. These are all very, very different. As for the opening question, can we survive AI? The answer is both yes and no. Yes, we can, because that's what we do. It's unlikely we're going to disappear off the face of the earth. But no, we will not be the same. Every task we give over to AI will have an effect. But whether in the final analysis this will be a good or a bad thing depends on many factors, including who you ask. Every time we amplify or extend a part of us, we correspondingly obsolesce another part. That is, in doing things a new way, we no longer do them in the old way. Before the linotype machine came along, typesetters were employed in great numbers, setting by hand the type for books, newspapers, and other printed materials. The linotype machine gradually took over as it made typesetters as a profession largely unnecessary. The work was largely automated, and an army of typesetters were out of work. A culture disappeared. Same goes for so many other once numerous and once vital jobs. Hollywood seems to be facing its linotype machine at the moment. We always find new things to do, and so many times labor saving means labor offsetting. I want to switch to some different but related areas of this subject. Let's add the word how to the question and play with that a bit, because I think this is the more crucial question or category of questions to address. How can we survive AI? It always seems like we're chasing our tails, that we're creating new fires faster than we're putting the old ones out. Does it have to be this way? I recall hearing about a community, I think it was a group of Hutterites in the central Canadian provinces or maybe the Midwestern United States, who, when smartphones were new, tested them out. They weren't necessarily anti-technology, but they were careful about the technology they adopted. They had a very close community, a community very clear on its values and its wish to maintain them. Technology that could help them and not necessarily negatively impact their values, great. Otherwise, not so great. So they'd select a small group where they had some volunteers, and they got phones and used them for a period. Later, they got together and compared notes and decided, after weighing pros and cons, all the things which were made easier or more convenient versus less desirable impacts on social and personal lives. And in the end, they decided to pass. Any person, family, or culture who wishes to maintain some continuity could learn from this example. Don't assume or fool yourself into thinking that your values can be maintained through wishful thinking or content curation. These values are based on certain structures, and these structures rest on foundations. Like a game of Jenga, you can remove a brick here, a brick there, but remove too many key bricks and the structure is sure to topple. And there you are wondering where your culture went and pining for the good old days. But what can we do? Marshall McLuhan famously, I'm going to raise Marshall McLuhan up there for obvious reasons. Marshall McLuhan, actually, show of hands. Has anybody heard of Marshall McLuhan before? I'm curious. Couple. Okay, cool. Marshall McLuhan famously, in Understanding Media, the Extensions of Man and elsewhere, broke down the effects of technology into two major categories, the personal and the social. Personally, we are individually affected by our innovations on a basic sensory and neurological level. Our senses are exposed to stimulus and respond according to the volume and quality of the stimulus, according to the makeup of our sensorium or our senses individually and together. That makeup is going to be different from culture to culture, age to age. And as children, we have a sort of base programming of our senses depending on the nature and level of sensory stimulus we're exposed to, which sets us up for life. This essentially is the McLuhan theory of communication. Everything we know, everything we are, is through the senses. Content is not the determining factor. Content is the delivery mechanism. As children, we're wide open and soaking it up. This is why I shudder when I see parents giving phones to babies and carriages. They don't understand what they're doing. We become what we behold. Why the book fails against the electronic device like iPad or iPhone is the great barrier to entry. You give a printed book to a baby in a baby carriage, and it's going to fumble with it for a minute and then start chewing on the edges. You give the baby a phone or a tablet, and it's playing Mario Kart in 30 seconds. It takes years to teach a child alphabetic literacy, to read and write. In that process, the brain is formed in certain ways, which lead to certain outcomes. We shape our tools, and thereafter our tools shape us. I find it odd that in a society which seems to understand and value physical fitness, that it requires training and upkeep, that we don't seem to understand that our minds and senses are no different. While the first few years are critical to our individual makeup, the journey doesn't end there. We know that our brains and our faculties continue to receive and respond to stimulus. We can gain and lose habits. Like many people, I spend a lot of my time every day looking at screens. I spend time on social media, on email, typing out essays and speeches like this, teaching and taking classes and meetings. But I also try to spend equal time with paper and books that I do with screens, though it's nearly impossible. Reading on screens is not the same as reading printed material. Reading is not reading. Both actually have their advantages and disadvantages, but they're very different technologies which affect us on a sensory and cognitive level very differently. On the screen, light comes through. On the page, light comes from in front and reflects. It makes for a very different effect on the eye and the brain. On the screen, our eye tends to skip and skim around more than it does on the page. This also has to do a bit with the font, as a sans serif font normally used on the screen, while serif fonts, those with the little ticks at the edges of the letters, are more often on printed material and act to hold the eye a bit more. The difference is that we tend to read more slowly on the page than on the screen, and to slow the eye is to slow the mind. It's similar with writing. I generally speak at about 140 words per minute, type at about 80, and write by hand about 40. Slowing my hand slows my mind, and for someone with a racing mind, it might be helpful to know that you can do something as simple as write a page to help slow down. A page a day written by hand over a week or month or more makes a measurable difference. There's a great exchange between Buckminster Fuller, W.H. Auden, and Marshall McLuhan. They gathered together in 1971 to hold a debate on television. My favorite part is when Auden, the playwright, says, "I wouldn't dream of having a television in my home." To which Marshall replies, "Well, you merely suffer the consequences without enjoying any of the benefits." It's a nice chime. Auden makes a point we should pay attention to, that we make media choices. We can choose not to have a television in our home. It's an order of magnitude more difficult, but we can choose not to have smartphones in our homes. Think for a moment what that would mean for you personally, not to have a smartphone. How would it shrink your options? Would it even be worth the consequences? So you managed to not have a smartphone. You still live in a smartphone world, surrounded by people who are under a spell. But you have some personal control, at least, some say in your personal ecology, if you want to think of it that way. Maybe you're part of a community that has taken the drastic measure of banning smartphones. It's a pretty rough solution, simply banning a technology from the community. But while crude, it's effective at least in the localized sense. So there are the personal consequences of technology. We're shaped as individuals. A blind or a sighted person naturally have different preferences, different values. What does a blind person care for visual art, visual culture, color of clothes? They care more for the tactile nature of clothing or anything else than the visual. The dominant technology of our day shapes us personally and socially. And to change the technological environment is to change everything else, as surely as losing your sight changes who you are. But what can we do about it? We have a certain measure of control over our personal lives, and that's the natural place to start. I think that when most people are thinking about buying a new device, they ask themselves whether they can afford it, as in financially. I think we need to ask whether we can afford it culturally. That's a much more difficult thing to consider. But consider that the technological choices we make shape us on an existential level. We are not the same. We will not be the same on the other side of AI. We've already stepped off the shore and are ankle, if not knee deep in it. It's not too late to influence the direction we go in. We have a lot more agency than we might think. Just as we are shaped as individuals and added together we get a culture, our individual choices speak more loudly, more choices or voices are added. The market speaks loudest, and every dollar counts. You vote with your wallet. Every dollar you spend is a vote in favor. Every dollar you withhold, a vote against. Economic power is arguably more effective than political and drives the political. Big companies might hold big influence, but you've given them that influence. You can make a different choice. I'm not saying it's easy. Here's a question for you. What are your values? What do you care about? And is the technology you use likely to support those things? Ask the same of technology companies, challenging them. What are your values? What do you care about? Is the technology you're developing going to support these things or undermine them? Will it create something new at the expense of the old? Will it create something new to improve the old? Will the unintended consequences overshadow the intended uses? I think one of the most pressing questions of our time is, how can we do better about unintended consequences? Technology companies are largely made up of people who are excited about what they do and genuinely want to make the world a better place. Unfortunately, our great advances in developing technologies are not matched by a great understanding of their personal and social effects. Changing the world is frighteningly easy. Doing it with intention is much more difficult. Culture is largely the result of the technological choices we make individually and collectively. Especially today, with the speed and scale of technological spread and effect, when it takes not decades or years or months or even days, but sometimes hours for a new medium to gain a foothold. A culture is born, supported, or dies as a result of the environment within which it exists. Like adding toxic effluent to an ecosystem or cleaning one up, the conditions either support or undermine the nature and quality of what's within it. A term like this can mean different things to different people, but media ecology is the notion that, like the natural environment around us, we live in a shifting and delicate ecosystem. This ecosystem responds as a whole, so that if you mess with the balance in one area, you typically affect the total situation. This analogy applies on the individual and the social levels. For most of human history, we've been as blind to it as we were to our effect on the natural environment. But as we can no longer ignore our effect on the planet, we can no longer ignore the effects of our innovations on ourselves individually and socially. Ecology, as applies to technology, is one possible answer to raising our heads into the sand, but we have no idea what it actually entails because it's only an idea right now. There is so much work to be done, so many questions to be raised and answered. Winding up, I promise. My father, Eric, in his last speech said, media ecology is not a spectator sport. It's late to be taking media ecology seriously, but I sincerely believe it's not too late. We need to understand that our technological environment is as sensitive as the natural environment around us and actually much more impactful to us as it shapes who we are and are not on fundamental levels. And today, with the global nature of our world, it's like the very air we breathe. The environment surrounds us all. We're soaking in it. To really turn things around, we need global cooperation. But as with anything else, it starts with us. The Food and Drug Safety Act, the FDA, were not suggested by corporations, who certainly fought tooth and nail against them. Neither were they political initiatives. People were sick and dying from tainted food, sick of snake oil and its salesmen, and demanded change. And we're in a similar position today. I think we all know it's not going great. We need to figure out what we can do about it. Regulation seems an impossible task for several reasons. The global nature of the situation is huge, but the fact of the existential yet subtle impact caused is perhaps the greatest hurdle. Again, Marshall McLuhan, in the opening chapter of Understanding Media in 1964, said, "I'm in the position of Louis Pasteur, telling doctors that their greatest enemy was quite invisible and quite unrecognized by them. Our conventional response to all media, namely that it's how it's used that counts, is the numb stance of the technological idiot. For the content of a medium is like the juicy piece of meat carried by the burglar to distract the watchdog of the mind." How do we anticipate these personal and social consequences? How do we account for unintended consequences, which tend to be quite different from the intended consequences? We are very bad at designing things without side effects. How do we measure our senses, our sensory balances, our sensoria? How do we test new technologies for the effect they'll have on our senses individually, the impact that they'll have on our societies and cultures? The answers to questions like these may be the answer to the question of how we might take control of our history going forward. Because they're difficult questions does not mean we shouldn't or can't address them. It's late in the day to start, but the day's not over. Our technological choices shape our individual and cultural outcomes. We're at the dawn of AI. I think the question is, where do we want to be at sunset? Thank you.
So.
I'll take answers, not questions, please.
Any questions here?
Okay, great. Is that mic working? Hello?
Now, see, if we were online, I could just close the laptop. But,
Let's switch.
Thank you, Isaac. Subimal Bhattacharjee, currently a visiting fellow at Ostrom Workshop. Before I ask you the question, I just wanted a moment to pay my respect to Senator Richard Lugar, who, built up the relationship with India as Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chairman. And I had the distinct privilege of meeting him in 2009 when I was heading the operations of General Dynamics in India. The question I want to put to you, and your topic, can we survive AI? If you go back to 1955, John von Neumann, one of the greatest mathematicians who have lived in this planet, he had written an essay in Fortune magazine called "Can We Survive Technology?" It was a 17-page essay that he wrote when he was almost afflicted with cancer, of course. And he was one of the, men who had a lot of fun. He used to play Nazi music at IAS Princeton just to annoy Einstein. He was the founder of the game theory, and a lot around artificial intelligence actually at the roots there. In that essay, "Can we survive technology?" he had mentioned, he asked that question and then he answered also that fundamentally the answer lies in how do we, as humans, control and use technology. Now you come back now to, maybe 68 years later. If you go last Tuesday rather, to the Senate Judiciary's hearing on, how to regulate AI. You take those three presentations. But one of the best presentations, and I would ask particularly everyone to even go through that presentation by Bill Daly, who's the chief scientist at NVIDIA, one of the foremost companies in this area. So he touched on every aspect of that and came to the same answer that it is the humans that has to control technology, and ultimately humans will control it. So I think you've touched a lot of those things, and in your very comprehensive paper. But how, as humans, will be able to control technology always is a question that we should ask, because in some places you referred to Elon Musk and so many people signing up. Do you think that even if you take a call to stop here or focus on responsible AI, others will do? Pockets of distrust will always remain. Hence, those things will never stop. So somewhere that point of responsible AI and how humans control it, I think that's something if you can throw some light, that would be very good. Thank you.
Well, these are big questions. It's almost like thinking about responsible nuclear warheads. It's a very difficult thing. I think we're in a fortunate position because for the first time in human history, we're asking these questions. And it's a blessing and a curse that we're in a position to do so. Marshall McLuhan, again, in Understanding Media, brought up Bertrand Russell, who said, if we only raise the temperature of the bathwater by 0.5 degree every hour, we wouldn't know when to screen it. So it's the nature of the world that we live in, that technological change happens so quickly that we don't have time to adjust. So we notice it for the first time, and we're asking these kind of questions. Whether it's in time or not is kind of hard to say, but I think it would be irresponsible to act otherwise. I genuinely believe that human ingenuity gets us into these messes, and human ingenuity can get us out of them. Maybe that's because I'm an optimistic person by nature, but the other way doesn't sound so great.
Thank you. We have a question here, and then I see your hand online. Adrian will be next.
Hi, I read the email that they sent me about this event that you were an author and a poet, is that correct?
Correct.
So, as an author and a poet, what do you think about the ethics of AI art? Like, do you think it should be something that could be promoted, or even like should it become a normal part of society?
Do I think art should become a normal part of society?
Yes. Do you think it should be promoted within the world of art?
It's such an interesting question, and it's not something that we've had to face before. It kind of comes down to the question, which is much older, which is what makes art good or bad. So we have to back up that far. And it's T.S. Eliot was once asked by somebody at a cocktail party about the wasteland. He said, I read The Wasteland, and I really got this and that and the other from it, and did I get it right? And he said, well, not only is your interpretation great, it might be better than mine. So I don't know that we should write off AI art, be it poetry or visual art. I think there might be some very useful things to come from it. There are also consequences. So, this is one of the things that Hollywood's grappling with now too. What about the humans? Should we not type speeches because that affects the outcome of the speech? Or ethics get to be such a tricky thing. If you're asking personally what I think, in a perfect world, I would say, the more the merrier. It might be helpful to, I made a little joke about being certified human, but it might be good to know if this was human or not, but does that matter? Like, if it gets us to think or to create new things, is that a bad thing? Also, how artificial is it? Because after all, it's just throwing our own things back at us. So in that way, it's just it's a remix of another kind. But I'm curious what you think actually. Do you think AI art is good or bad, or should be banned?
I don't particularly think it's bad, but I think that people should avoid sort of making it a normal thing, because it sort of takes away credibility from actual human artists, I believe, because AI is incapable of being as expressive and as authentic as humans. So,
you have a point. Thank you.
Adrian, and then Dino.
Hi. You mentioned three kinds of technologies, at least as I would categorize them. The linotype is decentralized. Art also, to some extent, is not. The TVs and the shining rectangles, mobile devices, tend to be corporate and dominated by one monopoly or oligopoly and profit or another. And then nuclear power, many aspects of it are neither of those. They're sort of controlled in a different way that obscures both the profit motive and the decentralization issue. So I'm very curious in your analysis, where will AI end up across these three?
Wow. I have no idea. That's an interesting question as well. You know, it almost always ends up somewhere different than we expect. So it's kind of pointless to speculate. But I think it's also valuable to speculate because, you know, by speculating, by weighing different scenarios, we can maybe come to a more full understanding of the nature of this thing and maybe have some input into which category it ends up in.
Thank you.
My name is Joanna. Hi.
Hi.
My name is. There it is.
I can hear you now.
Joanna Milanchik. I'm from the Letty School, and you know we have been here before. Many of you may have heard of the Luddites, and the Luddites are actually people who are supposedly anti-technology, and it comes from back in the day during the Victorian times when automatic looms were actually developed. So these were machines that could weave cloth faster and more efficiently than a human could. We had many people who would weave cloth at home, and it was threatening their way of life. And some people would argue that it was also dehumanizing to them because this artisan profession was being replaced by automation. And so the Luddites formed, and it was named after a dude named, I think, Ned Ludd. And they would just go in and break up these looms. So this is exactly what we're in right now, only replace weavers with writers, Hollywood, for instance. And our society didn't end, to your point, it changed. Did it change for the better or for worse? We can argue, but we do have really inexpensive clothing now as a result of that. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? We can argue. Now, to the gentleman before who was asking, where is AI going to end up? It's a great question. There was a book that came out a couple of years ago called The End of Professions. And that book brought up the fact that the middle class arose because we needed experts in specific areas like architecture and lawyers in law, in medicine, and so forth. And so this professional middle class developed because we needed people with very specific knowledge. It could be now that that very specific knowledge can be replaced with AI, and we don't need quite so many lawyers. And we can argue whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing, but that could be where AI ends up. And how does that affect art? I don't know. We think about textiles and how that's changed into a commodity from an art form. It could be that we're going to be moving more towards commodification of some of these ideas. But we'll see. It's an exciting time to be sure. And I very much enjoyed your talk. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Online, we have Mark, and then I see you.
Hey, Mark.
Hey, Andrew. I think I might have been in the room in one of the last times you spoke in front of an audience. Remember March of 2020? You barely got back.
New York.
Yeah, you
chased through to New York by COVID.
You barely got back to Canada before they closed the border.
Literally, yeah.
So I'd like to broaden this conversation a little bit. The ground of our lives, of course, has to do with writing systems, and Marshall was deeply committed, as I think was Eric, to the notion of a global world, initially global village and then global theater, but we're not in a global world anymore of the same sort. And so my question is, have you had a chance to reflect much on the impact of the difference between an alphabetic civilization and a logographic civilization, that is to say, China? And how will that difference, fundamental difference, in technology and therefore sensory balance, how will that be reflected going forward in terms of AI?
Well, Mark, I know that's your, I'm curious actually your answer, because that's kind of your area. You've been paying a lot of attention to that. What's the answer?
Well, I think we're already seeing it in many ways. Probably most importantly, we're reluctant to appreciate that China operates on completely different rules as a result of these technological differences. So what tends to happen, as Marshall said, and you know very well, war and peace isn't a matter of the global village anymore, but it's war and peace in what we would describe as a three spheres world. So I guess my answer to the question is lack of understanding and more likelihood of World War III.
Well,
Thanks, Mark. Here in the room.
Anybody else?
You know, right here, you had the microphone? Oh, you passed it away. Okay, over here behind you, Doc, behind you.
There you go. There's a switch.
Someone who had their hand up. Kyle, is that you? Okay. Oh, I see next to you. Okay.
All right. My name is Mark Holder. I'm a student at the media school studying media management. But earlier, or at the early part of your talk, you were talking about the cost of innovation, previous innovations, this new sort of creation innovation. And the fear, the fear that is sort of building behind this new innovation, and that seems to be coming through lack of knowledge and ignorance towards the topic. So with that, you continued on to later talk about regulation, but should our priority be to inform the public or put regulations into place to regulate the use of AI, corporate use of that? And a second question behind that, would it be then right to make regulations, whether they're enforced by corporations or government regulations? Would that be fair to the general public who has not been informed, and it hasn't been made an effort to inform the general public?
I think informing and educating are definitely the first thing. You know, the difficult thing about regulation and when it comes to governments is that technology moves at the speed of light and governments move at the speed of paper. So if you're trying to regulate AI, you've already lost. You know, Marshall McLuhan was concerned with media as a category, aside from specific technologies. Like, he was a book guy. He taught literature and poetry for his entire career. He loved content, really. If we're trying to regulate smartphones, or we're trying to regulate AI, or we try to regulate the next thing when it comes around, by the time it comes around, it's too late. We need to see if we can do anything about you know, analyzing and regulating technology as a category of things, like we regulate food and beverages or drugs or anything else. And that's, I think that's the huge challenge. But to your point, these things always, any change comes from the ground up because there's absolutely no motive for companies or governments for that matter to self-regulate. Self-regulation means delaying products to market, and nobody wants to do that. But if it's a level playing field, that's a different matter. So once these things are in place, you know, that's one thing. Putting them in place is another thing. And that was the point I was trying to make earlier about how much impact we have as individuals is, you know, our votes, our wallets really are our biggest foe. You know, when there's a big enough incentive for change to happen, change happens. You know, when people refuse, I don't want to pick on Apple or BlackBerry's still around, Android or anything. I don't want to single anybody out because it's not about singling them out. But if we refuse to support these things financially, they're going to make changes because they want our dollars. You know, that's crass, but that's what it comes down to. And I think that's the easiest route toward making change is by this kind of ground movement. Sorry, I've been facing that way the whole time. Hi, this side of the room.
Your mic's off.
Hello.
There we go.
Great. Awesome. My name is Ethan, and being born and raised in part of the global south, I haven't been exposed to this kind of technology before. Having come to IU, I've seen some of the work that's been done and gotten the opportunity to access things like ChatGPT. And when we talk about things like a global village, ethics are shared, but values are not. And as we find most of these technologies being built outside of the global south, where maybe there are conflicts in values, my question is whether you talk about can we survive AI, maybe on a large scale to do with military applications, but I'm thinking more holistically in the sense of identity.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm
For a
talking
lot
about.
of culture, for a lot of societies, their identity is based in their culture. And having such technology with such immense potential and massive range, I ask myself whether it be the case of certain agendas being placed onto individuals like myself, born and raised in the global south, and what that may mean for our identity and our societies moving forward.
Definitely. I kind of joke that a new technology is an identity crisis as a service, because that's basically what it amounts to. We're juggling with people's identities, not just their sense of who they are, but who they actually are individually or as groups. And that's not ever the warning on the side of the box or on the commercial. You know, you're sold the advantages of the thing. You're not told that this is going to change the way you do things, right? It's like, there's another story, I'm not sure if it's apocryphal or true, but this well-meaning person is in a village in India, and they don't have plumbing, right? And they spend a good part of their day going back and forth to the well to draw water. And this guy shows up, and he's from the West, and he's like, we can put in pipes, and we can pipe this water right into your home, and you'll have, a third of your day freed up. And they're like, that is a terrible idea, because going to the well is when I see people, it's when we catch up on things, it's when we share, it's when we laugh and cry and support each other. Why would we ever want to take that away? That's media ecology as well, but it's a rare example of understanding how much technology, even things that are sold as, labor-saving devices, actually make our identities as we know them untenable. It's very, the two things are a little bit at odds, designing one product, but understanding that it's, because the effect of technologies, the effect of the iPhone here is not the same as the effect of the iPhone from the global south. It's very different things. And how do you account for that? I don't know. Thank you for your question.
Well, I'm noticing the time, and we have plenty of time to stay if anybody wants to, but I also want to give freedom to the people online. If you wanted to leave right at 1. But so everybody who's here, please join me first and foremost in thanking Andrew McLuhan for his excellent talk. As we said, if you're able to stay and have more questions, please stay for the discussion. But those of you that need to leave online, please, now would be a perfect exit point. So we just didn't want you to feel captive here, okay? Are there any other questions?
Who had the question?
It's so cool to see so many friends online from back home. It's hilarious. I live actually on a road between Bloomfield and Wellington, Ontario, and my kids thought it was pretty funny that I was coming to Bloomington.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Here we are.
Question over there?
Hello, my name's Ian. Thank you for the speech, by the way. It was really awesome to hear. And yeah, definitely educated me in a lot of ways. But I was sort of wondering, I kind of wanted to ask about clarification, sort of about your message. I was wondering, were you saying just AI intrinsically, without it even being used in certain ways, reflected in the systems we have, just its presence will affect us and completely change who we are?
Essentially, but like I said, content is the delivery mechanism, right? That last quote I brought up, content is like the juicy piece of meat used to distract the watchdog of the mind. That's again from T.S. Eliot, who said that the chief use of meaning in a poem is to have it to occupy the person. It's like the juicy piece of meat carried by the burglar to distract the watchdog of the mind. And the point is that while it doesn't even matter what the poem is about, you could be writing, a poem about cornflakes, or you could be writing a poem about, you could be writing The Wasteland. The Wasteland didn't have to be April was the cruelest month. It could have been June was the cruelest month. The point is that while you're absorbing the content, the form is doing its work, rearranging your sensibility, rearranging your culture. That's not to say that the content doesn't play a vital role. If there were no content, then obviously the thing would have no effect. There has to be content. But as far as the lion's share of the effects happen, reshaping us individually and socially, that doesn't happen on the content level, but the medium level. Does that make it a bit more clear?
The last one, and then we can, then we can have a more informal chat.
Mine is more like a challenge to people. I don't know if Mark is still there. Did Mark punch out?
I told us we're gonna have more work.
Yeah, well,
I'm afraid we're doomed.
well, Mark is also a field scholar and runs the Center for the Study of Digital Life, which is predicated on realizing we are now digital as well as corporeal beings.
That's a whole other talk.
It's a lot of talk. Well, here's the thing. Who are we? When we speak of we, wonderful to hear we have in the global south there. Mark makes this distinction between east and west, and then digital is another sphere, 12 spheres. But often when we say we need this, we go straight to regulation. The challenge I'd like to make to people is imagine that's not an option. That paper is going to move too slow. That anything that happened And the vested interests are gonna be the ones, like, all the people that got invited to Washington to talk about AI were just, Andrew Carnegie and Mellon and Rockefeller not doing anything. So what would we do if we're not, don't have that option? It's a thought experiment.
That's a good question. I'm also curious to know, at the beginning, I kind of asked you to keep in mind that I could have written any or all of this paper using GPT or whatever. Did anybody actually think about that? And, yeah, what do you think?
I kind of thought that some parts would maybe one of the anecdotes with things like ChatGPT. I don't know.
Okay.
You're not gonna tell them? Okay.
Anybody else? Guesses? Yeah.
Just, I was projecting my tendencies. You might have used it as a tool to generate ideas more quickly, and then you refine them. That's what I did.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Maybe you didn't think about it at all.
Give the mic now, but you can hand it over. I think.
Go ahead.
Sure.
So
Put it on, you have to switch it on.
So my question is to do with I believe wrote an amazing book called AI Superpowers, and within it he talks about how with the emergence of AI, we find ourselves turning more to looking for happiness or for joy in more holistic things like passions and hobbies. But as we see this huge intersection between AI and some of the creative aspects or creative outlets people use, do you think that would lead into a diminishing of the value that, like the appreciation we have for some of those creative outlets, and subsequently lead up to maybe very sad society, very lost society, people who are looking for purpose?
Yeah, definitely. It's easy to imagine a swing toward more obviously human things. Like any digital art is naturally suspect. Any image that you see, is that real? Is that AI? I don't know. So there could be a natural, pendulum swings back toward, oil paintings and in-person things. A reaction in schools could be a move toward oral discourse and, away from essays and that sort of thing. I think that's a natural movement. I think we'll probably end up somewhere in the middle where we find, like this person suggested, you can use the AI to create a pretty quick and dirty outline and then fill in the blanks or make it, add your little touch or whatever. That's probably where it's going with Hollywood. AI can generate a full script in like 10 seconds flat. You can, your really good writer can come in and smooth out some of the wrinkles and add a little human touch in there. As for my piece, I've never tried Midjourney or GPT or any of those things. So, I typed it on my computer. I made some notes on my smartphone on the airplane. I made some handwritten notes before that. But yeah, I haven't as yet messed with a GPT or anything else. But I could have, it's less of a challenge. I like a challenge, not too much of a challenge maybe. But I thought it would have been pretty funny if I just came and read like a GPT thing, but also I'd probably be for play. But yeah, Joyce.
So for the people in the room online, somebody did that. They asked your question at the chat, and then put it in the chat. And basically, it said, "Well, can humans survive AI? Well, the verdict is still out. So ChatGPT.
I don't know if I would trust AI's answer to that question.
Exactly. Anyway, so I just thought I would add that to the group because most people in the room aren't reading the chat. But I wanted to bring up something about the art question that was asked earlier. And I think about photography, like early on, photography was, this is not art, this is, some other thing. And it just seems to me like, as you so excellently said in your talk, things just evolve. Humans evolve, and now we have a new thing. It's humans plus AI. It's a totally different thing than like, oh, AI all by itself. And we're just in the very, very, very beginning stages of finding out what that plus is.
Yeah, and that's also part of our cycle with technology, is that we come up with a new form, and first of all, we usually use the new tool to do the old job, to make it faster, more efficient, sexier, whatever, one way or the other. And then at some point, oftentimes when we come up with a new technology, we finally figured out what that other technology was kind of unique and good for. So that's part of the cycle. And it is fairly predictable. What's also predictable is that the new form is going to be shocking to the established culture or people in charge. But 10 or 20 years down the road, it's going to look pretty tame. It's kind of funny. I think about Elvis, right? Elvis Presley. Back in like the 50s, when Elvis was new, the kids were going crazy for him, and the parents, this was the most shocking thing they'd ever seen, and stuff. They're swinging his hips. But can you imagine a more benign figure than Elvis Presley? Honestly, right? That's something to keep in mind when thinking about AI as well. We might look back in 10 years and say, remember people were so panicked about AI? Like, come on, right? Like now we're dealing with this, and now that's a real something we should all be very scared about. And geez, let's put a stop to this thing, right? But none of that is to say that we shouldn't take AI seriously. I'm not sure Skynet is about to go autonomous on us, but I'm not sure it's not. I don't know. The point is that in a time when we can create technologies of such power and such scale and reach, we really need to start treading a little more carefully, because there's no going back. There's only going forward. So let's choose wisely, I think.
Just a reminder, there is food. So please have some food, stay around a little bit, have informal conversations. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody in the internet world. Goodbye.
Hey, Chris.
Save the chat. Save the chat.